Ayman Khan here for Seconds Out with Eddie Hearn, who's doing a lot of firefighting right now outside of the ring, but hopefully there'll be some firefights in the ring on Saturday night. What's your pick of the fights heading into the weekend?
I honestly think it's going to be a brilliant card. There's a lot of good competitive matchups. There's a lot of people that are looking to change their life and a lot of young prospects that have to make statements with their win. I mean, when you look at the TV card, Jordan Flynn against Kane Baker, we saw the first fight over 8 rounds, one of the undercard fights of the year. I think it's going to be a great fight to kick us off. Jordan Flynn, if he's the prospect that he says he is, needs to produce a dominant performance against Kane Baker, who will fight with every ounce of his heart and balls on Saturday night in his hometown. Sol Dakers is in a really interesting fight against Chris Thompson, big South African heavyweight as well. I think Sol might be a little bit of a sleeping giant of the domestic heavyweight scene. He wants to fight Wardley, Adelaide, Fraser, all those guys now. And again, that's going to be a tough fight for him. Brilliant fight as well between Conor Walker and Cyrus Patterson. Not for our own doing, but people have found out that Cyrus Patterson could headline against Lewis Ritson if he comes through. But Conor Walker, all action. Again, like tough guy. Going to be a great fight. And Alycia Baumgardner, I'm not really saying one of the best prospects anymore, just one of the best flyweights in the world. First time in Birmingham, Olympic gold medalist, of course, and boxed at Madison Square Garden and O2 and Abu Dhabi, but wants Sonny Edwards, wants Bam Rodriguez, wants all those guys, and got to come through a solid domestic test on Saturday.
You mentioned some of the big nights in the past in Birmingham. Do you feel like Alycia Baumgardner can be someone who can spearhead the resurgence in Birmingham, an area which doesn't get the big nights sometimes?
Yeah, he has to be, because I think it's going to take something at that level. Do you know what I mean? And although Galal's not, going to be out there throwing tables and screaming and shouting, he is an outstanding talent, and he's someone that I believe can dominate divisions in the future. So he's, going to be a flag bearer for this city. You saw last night, like there's a big boxing community in Birmingham. We'll have 4,000 there on Saturday, which is great for a next-gen show. The fighters have sold a lot of tickets, so I think there's big potential here. But as always, you need the talent coming through from the area to build those big shows.
Because you feel someone who's just as important because he's a heavyweight, so he's got that factor too.
Yeah, I think, anytime Birmingham can get a big heavyweight that has a big future, I think it's going to give him an opportunity to do well. He sold a lot of tickets, and in a good fight. And I think he's, because he's willing to have those big fights, I think you can throw him in those big fights here in Birmingham, and I think the city would get behind a big heavyweight.
Well, correct. You know you're a Southerner. It's Birmingham, not Birmingham. Can we get it right?
No, Birmingham. What did I say?
Birmingham.
Yeah, but I'm a sort of fake Cockney, aren't I? I'm an Essex boy. Birmingham. Is that all right?
We got it in the end. Now, I've got to get your response to, Alycia Baumgardner testing positive. The statement's been released. Set the table for us. What's your reaction to that?
Disappointing. Obviously, terrible for Alycia, terrible for Matchroom, terrible for the sport. We talked yesterday about this increased testing that we're putting around all these big fights or fights in general, and this is unfortunately going to happen when you test at that kind of level. Look, Alycia obviously protests her innocence. She feels, she took a test shortly before that. She took a test 2 days after on fight night. She was negative, but she still needs to go through the procedure of answering that laboratory results. When we found out the weekend, obviously the commission and the governing bodies were made aware as well. We know these things, once you tell the governing bodies, do leak out, and it was important that she had an opportunity to make her statement, which she did, and we aligned with that. We support her opportunity to try and clear her name. I hope that she can do that, of course. But I think that moving forward, we need to make sure that we keep this level of testing up for fights, and I hope that other promoters, I know it's always Matchroom, the only promotional company in the world, but we are investing at a level that other promoters aren't going anywhere near in terms of testing. And I wish that sometimes the media and you guys would go to shows and say, is there testing for this fight? But those people don't really want to get in front of the camera and answer questions like that, but I'm happy to do so because I think it's important. And I think all these learnings are making me think about a better system. I'm not a governing body, I'm not a commission, but clearly I do have some power in the sport that might be able to make the system evolve in a more efficient manner so that we can test more athletes, because ultimately that is the only way, is to increase testing to make the sport as clean as possible.
Eddie, the test was taken July 12th, returned August 10th. Is that a normal length of time? Is that a length of time that you're happy with?
No, not really, but it's quite standard. When there's we spoke to Drug Free Sport yesterday, when there's a positive test, there is sometimes an additional analysis to that test. So that's why normally on our VADA test, it's normally 2 to normally 3 weeks till you get the result. The testing time is the same with VADA as drug-free sport. It's in the same laboratory in Salt Lake City. Everything is the same. One of the points that people made on social media, and I listened to all of it, and this isn't a conversation where I say, this is the facts, shut up you. This is an open conversation to try and improve testing in the sport. So one of the things that I read a lot online was, she went into the fight with that in her system. But when you test 2 or 3 days before, it is impossible. If you speak to VADA, you speak to drug-free sport, in that process, it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks, maybe a little bit longer if there's a positive test, to give those results. I do also feel that because that was effectively a post-fight test, there is not as much urgency from the agency as there would be on an earlier test. Like I looked at some of the AJ and Dillian White tests from VADA, and it's around 3 weeks, that process. So this was a few days longer, but again, because of the positive sample, there was probably additional analysis as well. So I don't know the answer to that. And some people said, what's the point in testing on fight night or 2 or 3 days out from the fight if you can't get a result? Well, the answer is to make sure that fighters are aware that you're going to get randomly tested at any moment. So of course, we still want to know if a fighter went into that fight with something in their system. But in an ideal world, the fight doesn't take place if they do. But that is impossible when you're tested, of course, on fight night, but even a day or 2 or 3 days before the fight.
Can I ask you about whether you're concerned about the levels of mescaline that was found in the system, whether that concerns you, considering it's, I believe, an exorbitant amount that would be expected to be seen in a female sample on average?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the levels. There's something called a chain of command, which means that when the sample is collected, that process from there is logged in extreme detail. I've seen the chain of command, i.e. when it sampled to the laboratory, etc. I haven't looked at length to the levels or the substances. Again, it's difficult because, we support Alycia. I think she's a tremendous fighter. And, if you ask me the question, do I believe she's innocent? I would say, if you ask me that, yes. But also, we can't, and I get criticised for that, as I always do, but of course you can't ignore what is in the system, the substances, the levels of what they may be. So it looks like the governing bodies, we've already received correspondence from the governing bodies to say this is the process that we will undertake in this situation, which is really good. Because another thing that I think is an open conversation is I've been thinking recently about how do we continue to expand testing in the sport? Is there a matchroom testing pool for our fighters? Because I don't think that other promoters are going to invest the money, in all honesty. And I'm not having a dig at them, but we've got to make our own moves. So if we said to our fighters, every fighter that's signed to Matchroom, you are going to be part of a VADA testing pool like the WBC, where you will be random testing. I think that's a great look. The problem is, who deals with it? We can't deal with a disciplinary matter for a fighter. We'd be laughed out of town. Can you imagine? Matchroom have got this positive, they are going to deal with it. We'd get so heavily criticised for that, but someone needs to. Whether it's the ABC, whether it's the State Commission, whether it's different governing bodies. In this instance, it's Michigan Commission and the governing bodies of the championship belts that she owns that have to decide how they're going to handle that process. We'll support her during that process, but also realise it's going to be a tough road. But she protests her innocence and give her the opportunity to show that.
Just finally, Eddie, moving on to Conor Benn, an appeal is expected. Well, you expected it. Looks like it's forthcoming now, based on the grounds of jurisdiction, and also then the scientific evidence wasn't examined. You kind of said in the first instance that it was to do with jurisdiction. What's the situation there with the appeal?
Yeah, again, these hearings, I just get told by the lawyers you can't comment on a legal, especially now there's an appeal. But I've already made my comments that it wasn't jurisdiction, but. Anyway, disappointing that the board have chose to appeal. Particularly disappointing that they've chose to wait till the last day or 2 days of that appeal process. Make your own mind up about that. But been there before, have to go through the process again. Conor Benn is licensed. He already has a license to fight. So he could fight right now in America. He could also apply for permission to box as an international fighter in Britain right now. He's not suspended by UKAD. He's not suspended by the British Boxing Board of Control. Therefore, I believe he would get permission to box. Subject to the politics, maybe not. But we've just got a meeting on Saturday to go through if he's going to box now or if we go through the appeal process. I don't expect that to be too lengthy. And again, from our side, we don't see any different result being forthcoming. But again, it's another thing he's been asked to go through, and hopefully once we get this boxed off, everyone will finally say, okay, hands up, it's time.
Will you fight during this period?
Very likely, yes. But again, depends how long that appeal process is going to be. He's cleared to box. He's not suspended. That suspension has been lifted. And therefore, having spoken to the international licence that he has, they are happy because that suspension has been lifted for him now to fight. And they will sanction him to fight. So this is not a made-up commission or it's a respected commission that he is licensed with, that he will now have no problems with him fighting because that suspension has been lifted.
Last thing I just want to get your thoughts on. Look, it's very strange. We kind of lambast the influencer boxing scene, but they had a fighter test positive. He admitted it, which is a rarity in fight sports at all. Can't remember the name. My apologies. I will get that information to you. But it was performance enhancing for sure. Yeah. Then the PBA acted upon it. They banned him and given him a fine for that too, and I think it's a 2-year ban. How can they get it so right in their infancy in their sport, but we get it so wrong?
Their governing body, the PBA, yeah? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a governing body that make their own decisions. I do think as well that the problem is that these are huge cases that are affecting people's career and opportunity to earn money. With that comes a lot of legal risk in making decisions. So people are definitely more tentative to make a decision. I think the process at the moment with the British Boxing Board of Control and UKAD is far too lengthy. Like, as soon as there's a positive test, that process, in my opinion, has to begin immediately. And actually, like what I've seen in some of the Alycia Baumgardner situation, we only found out at the weekend, but we've already had an email from a governing body saying, this is exactly what's going to happen now. Perfect. We can't adjudicate over those adverse findings, but the governing body, that's their job to do it. But at the same time, they're making decisions of such a high level, and the reason the PBA are able to come in and say, because they don't really have, not say anything to lose, but they can just come in at that level and say, sorry mate, you tested positive, you're banned by, and he goes, okay, fine. You're here talking about someone getting stripped, someone losing their value as a world champion, someone losing out on multi-million pound paydays. If someone's wrong making that decision, that ends their organisation. It's people like VADA, who are a huge Olympic organisation, drug-free sport, who represent the NFL, the NBA, NCAA, NASCAR, LPGA. If they get something wrong, it's the end of that organisation. These are huge organisations. So they need to make sure, as they always do, that everything in the reporting, everything is absolutely spot on. And that's the same for the decision-making process. Whoever makes that decision is really on the line to make sure they make the correct one. And it is messy. But all we can do as a promotional company is keep ramping up the testing and keep making sure that fighters know they're going to be tested going into these fights. Alycia Baumgardner asked for testing for that fight. Leonardo too didn't. Alycia did. And that, when you see that and you hear that and you're involved with that, it does really confuse you. But we can't ignore, as we never ignore, the facts of results. You have to go through a process to clear your name. And hopefully she can do that.
Conversation, appreciate it.